When you write a book, you never really know how people are going to respond to it. And when you invite four men to read a book that's written for women, well, I have to admit I was a little nervous. Beyond the Ladder was written to help women redefine leadership and success on their own terms. But I've always wondered, would the stories, the reflections, and the themes resonate just as much with men? So I decided to ask. And I had a conversation out loud. And in this episode, I'm joined by four incredible leaders: Ben Osborn, Cyrus Park, Damiano Urbinello, and Patrick Bartosch. None of them had met before. So when we walked into the studio, there were no prep calls, there was no rehearsals, just answers. And we had a very, what I believe, genuine, curious, and open exchange about the feedback in the book and leadership and what it really means to them. So I've had the privilege of working with each of them. And what has always stood out for me about all of them is their openness, their ability to reflect, and to have a very open and honest dialogue. They're not just leaders in their fields, they're allies in the truest sense. And their presence here represents something powerful: men choosing to listen, to learn, and to contribute to these conversations. And that's where real allyship begins in my mind. So, not in speaking for others, but in standing beside them. So, together we'll explore what happens when men read a book that's written for women, what themes resonate across gender lines, what surprised them, and how can we create more spaces where everyone, regardless of their gender, can talk openly about leadership and about growth and have the courage to work on change. So, enjoy the episode. Hello, gentlemen. It is so wonderful to have all of you. It's like I see all of your faces usually on individual calls and just love the conversations that we had. I was so happy when you agreed to do this podcast with me. You are gentlemen that I've had contact with a lot in the past, and I know you're open, and I know you're going to be very honest. So that's what I really love about this conversation. You have taken the step. You've read a book that I've written. So thank you very much for even taking the time and looking. Actually, two books. It's a lot of information. Now, you probably got it and thought, whoa, wait a minute. I was expecting one book, but no, it was two. And I'm really curious to hear your insights. But I'd like for each of you, if you could give a brief introduction about yourself and tell us who you are and where you are. And maybe we'll do that alphabetically. So Ben, that starts with you.
Yeah, hey Sabine, really good to see you and everyone else. Real pleasure to be with you all today. So I'm Ben Osborn. I've been with Pfizer over 25 years now. My current role is I'm the president of the International Commercial Office. Simply put, that means I lead our marketing organization across all of the countries outside of the US, across our end-to-end portfolio.
Great. Thanks, Ben. And you're in the UK.
I'm based in the UK, yes.
In the UK, yeah. So good to see you. And 25 years, that's impressive. You know,
I know.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. And then next is C. Cyrus, we're going
Thanks.
to head over to you.
Thanks, Sabine. Hi, all. I'm Cyrus Park. I'm American, actually. I live and work in the Netherlands. I spent the last 15 plus years primarily in the CRO, clinical CRO industry. Started as a project manager, worked through different roles, and now executive director, business development at CRO. I'm in a transition. The last CRO post I was at was IQVIA, and looking forward to starting new again in December.
Where you are.
I'm moving to Parexel.
Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
And Damiano, nice to have you.
Hi, everyone, and thanks much for having me. Very, very curious about the discussion. Thanks for the invitation. Looking forward to the different chats. So Damiano, living in Switzerland, currently leading value, access, and external affairs at Merck at local level, so for Switzerland. An epidemiologist by training, spent some year in research, working for the government, and now in the private industry.
Thanks, Damiano. And Patrick.
Hey everyone, I'm Patrick. I have been working in healthcare for more than 20 years. I'm German American. I'm based in Austria. Damiano and I were neighbors, kind of country-wise, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
And I've been a consultant in the pharmaceutical and medical industry for more than 5 years now. And yeah, very excited to be speaking with this group about a couple of very interesting topics. Thanks for having
Yeah.
us, Sabine.
Great. No, thank you. All right, well, we'll jump straight in. So when I wrote the book, I talked about Beyond the Ladder a lot, but there was a book and a workbook. I'm curious, what were your first impressions when you got the package? What did it spark? What were your initial thoughts? Damiano?
So actually, I was very interested by the premise to have a dedicated book and including a workbook dedicated for women. I think this offers a different approach also to leadership and challenging also traditional notions.
Thanks. And Patrick, how about you?
My first, we said earlier we're going to be very frank in this discussion.
Please
right?
do.
I thought, oh, it comes with the workbook. I actually have to do some work here as well. And then I want to be honest, it actually turned out to be my favorite part of the book and the workbook combination because it really forced you to think about what you just read and try to apply it to yourself and the people that you know. And I actually really did enjoy that. And I came out of this experience reading the book that I thought, more books should have this workbook with them because otherwise you read, you put it down, and you're done. This
Yeah.
was much more interactive, and I thought it was just brilliant, and I actually really loved it.
Okay, great. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, the first, I have to work. I love that. Or you don't have to, but it's
You
suggested.
know me, right? You saw this coming.
Yeah, Patrick. And Ben, how about you?
Well, first of all, I was super, super pleased to receive it because I remember you saying a few years back that you wanted to do this. So first of all, I was super happy for you, Sabine, that you'd actually taken the time to do it because writing a book like that is not straightforward. It requires a huge commitment. So yeah, for me, there was actually a reminder that if you really want to do something, you really believe in it, then go all in. And it was very, very clear from not just the book, but how you presented it, how it all came together, that you'd really, really thought deeply about this. I mean, I think as others have said, I thought the practical nature of it, the workbook, was very different. Was very different to almost every book on leadership that sat behind me here, which is almost a you read it and you have to take it away and plan that for yourself. Actually, the piece that's really stuck with me, and these sit on my desk, is the work cards and the little
Oh, nice.
the
Yeah.
coaching cards. So I've got a number of
Nice.
these that I pulled out. There were 5 that really, really resonated with me. They're 5 that are a good reminder for me personally. And then I've regularly used some of the other cards with colleagues, my team, and others that I mentor as well. So yeah, but again, very, very practical tips.
Yeah, thanks. I love that. And I have them on my desk too, and I use them. And sometimes I start the day, I think about what am I going to do today and pull
Yeah.
one. And I haven't even talked about those that much. Maybe I'll do a little blurb at the end about the cards. Cyrus, what about you? Thanks, Ben.
The same. I echo everyone else's thoughts. My initial thought was, oh wow, thank you, Sabine. Thanks for sending me your book. And nice colors, nice graphics, look and feel, everything. Great content, subject matter, all was really interesting. I wanted to dive right in, and then I saw, hey, the workbook. Like everyone else has iterated, I think the real book is the workbook, and the career guide, the smaller book, is sort of the instruction manual of how to use it properly in a way, And what I felt as I got more familiar with the books was the thought that lingered in my mind was, I wish I had something like this earlier in my career, just to kind of give structure and guidance to think about things in a certain way. And I think the workbook and the accompanying book does that very well.
Well, thanks. That's really interesting to hear the different perspectives. And I'm going to jump straight in. One of the first chapters is about values. And well, I know most of you very well, so I know that that's something that's very important to you. But we talk about values as compasses and not kind of these slogans, that you see on the wall and you read them, but they don't really mean anything. So if you just think about yourself, and we tend to step away from the book, what value most resonates for you, and how do you integrate that also into your work every day? Or do you? Or does it come in and out? I'm just curious how values kind of is a thread. And whoever wants to jump in,
Yeah,
happy
maybe
to.
happy to jump in, Sabine. I think values, you can't be in and out on values. I think it has to
Mm,
be a constant and a daily consistent in how you show up, how you think, how you behave. The reason I say that is if you don't provide that consistency for colleagues, I I don't think there's trust that's ultimately built, because colleagues then see you for one thing and then not the same thing later on in time. So I think it's that consistency day in, day out that really matters. For me, my number one value, I share this widely on a regular basis, is fairness. Um,
mm,
I've had that value since I was probably a teenager. Not quite sure where that came from, whether it was nurture, nature, what have you. But fairness for me drives how I approach things. And that doesn't mean to say you don't take difficult decisions or decisions that don't have, really big, significant impact. Um, but ultimately, as I think about this in terms of how I show up, I want colleagues they may not like the decision, but ultimately in the fullness of time, and that may be months or even a year or so later, they understand why the decision was made and that they were treated in a fair way. And that's really, really important to
yeah. Yeah, I can imagine also that people leave with that feeling. So it's not just talking about making decisions that way, but if they reflect, that's a really good way to look at it, is that they say, okay, I wasn't happy, but I feel that I was treated fairly. And
exactly.
that
Yeah.
just is
Yeah.
a huge, huge thing for employees.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Fairness. Love that. Anyone else want to jump into that?
When reading through the book and reading through the workbook, there was section about values, and I started to think about what my values also were. And I think I boiled it down to 4 or 5. What I value most is transparency, you know, um, which leads to sort of clarity and precision in thoughts and ideas. Integrity is another one, which helps to build trust and honesty. Another thing that I value is kindness. And I'm not talking about being nice, but uh, trying to trying more to keep the best interest of others in my mind. And that sort of relates to having kindness as a value. Curiosity, a topic that comes back in your book over and over and over again. I find I value curiosity. But above all, when times gets tough and when the pressure is on, I think integrity, doing the things, like Ben said, consistently and in the right way, um, which continues to build trust and honesty. I think that has helped me throughout my career, but also in life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You're right. The integrity piece. You're right. Both of you are, it's like building this trust with the people that surround you is so key.
Maybe to add on that, it's also all about compassion. So this is a value that resonates very well in terms of being true to oneself, to myself, but showing also empathy towards colleagues. I think this strengthens also the boundaries and the bonds between team members, and boosts also the team cohesion. And at the end, it's when you show and demonstrate compassion also in a team, it's also about psychological safety. And for me, this is one of the most important aspects to really feel everyone safe, trusted, and being able to speak up. And I think with that, alongside of integrity, it was one value which resonated most. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true, that psychological safety. I'd like to dive into that a little bit deeper later, and especially looking at this gender piece, because that's what I'd like to look at is about that psychological safety and the empathy, and maybe some of the biases that I have also about what happens when men are setting up meetings and have those thought process. So I look forward to doing that in a few minutes. But Patrick, what about you? What about your values? What do you live by?
Yeah, I echo pretty much everything that was said before, but I want to highlight empathy again, which I think is one of the most important values to me. And one person, a global leader that stands out to me for that is New Zealand's former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. And she actually wrote a really good book, and it's called A Different Kind of Power. And I was lucky to actually watch her in Oxford a couple of months ago when she talked about the role of empathy and how empathy is often considered a female quality among leaders. And I found that term so weird because, first of all, I agree, but it's when men say it, it's often presented as something that's like cute, like it's almost a little negative, right? Well, it absolutely isn't. It's actually really important for a leader to be empathetic. That is nothing
Yeah.
to do with female leadership, but the reality is still that females actually do it better than men. That's just a fact. And I think Jacinda Ardern just represented this so perfectly. And when you look at the COVID-19 pandemic and the countries that were led by women at the time, and they just fared so much better than countries that were not. And that says a lot. And a lot of that she claims in her book and her presentation that a lot of this was due because of her focus on empathy. And I thought that was just a very powerful example that's really backed up by the facts and real life. So empathy to me is really key.
Patrick, well done throwing the first boom. The piece in the room about empathy and this idea, because you're right, we hear that a lot. Does everyone agree, or obviously we're making some generalizations? Have you seen it also in your career growth and your career development? Have you worked for women as compared to men and seen a difference?
Yeah, for sure. I've worked with a lot of great male and female leaders, and I don't want to sell anyone short, but if I had to just generalize quickly, I think the good male leaders, or many of the male leaders that I've worked with, are more action oriented doers, kind of lead by example, have this sort of want to be the hero, and a lot of the female leaders that I've worked with are more calculative, more taking into account the views and the ideas of others before taking action. Um, I have tons of examples in all of my career places that I've been where I've noticed this trend.
I would say broadly, my observations are that there's a more consistent empathetic approach from female leaders that I've worked for. I say broadly, I think that is changing though. I've
Mm.
noticed, I would say, probably this side of the pandemic. I think the pandemic was a real turning point, and I wonder whether that was actually just the older ways of leading, and as Cyrus just described,
Yeah.
uh, were less applicable. I think, frankly, during the pandemic, and then I think it's caused people to rethink what leadership really means. And I'm really pleased now that you hear far less of this soft, hard leadership. That was outdated
Yeah.
thinking. Decades
Yep.
ago, but it persisted, I think, for far too long. But I've seen
Yeah.
a real shift actually since the pandemic. I would say.
So would you say it's more of a generational piece than
Actually,
it is a gender piece?
I think there is something to that. I think there probably is, and
Yeah,
certainly
I think
now,
so
if I
too.
look to some of the younger generation now, and how the experiences that they have, and how they're balancing their as a male leader, they're balancing home and work life. That's what many female leaders have been dealing with for years and years and years. It
Mhm.
hasn't necessarily always
Yep.
been acknowledged and recognised. And that's I think
Mhm.
why we are where we are today with many of the challenges that we see around gender pay gap and others that you talk about in the book. but I think it is shifting. So I'm really optimistic for the future that we will see more of an empathetic leadership across the board, regardless of gender.
And is it something that you teach? Are you able to, in your roles also, do you work with your team, and do you teach empathy?
I think that's a great question. I I have to believe that you can, to some extent, teach empathy. My personal belief is I think a lot of it comes from your own personal experience. We've talked many
Mm,
times, Sabine, about the experience that I have with my eldest son with disabilities. From the
yeah,
moment I experienced that, of what that meant for me, that totally changed my outlook on empathy and leadership. And my view is, I think those people that have had moments in their life where empathy has had to shine through, or it's really take prominence, I think I see that then play through in terms of how they lead.
yeah. Damiano, you laughed too when you said, "Can you teach empathy?" What do you think about that?
That's a very good question. Well, I mean, at the end, it's a process, and it. I mean, I think people behave depending on how you approach them. And I think with that, if you create a space where everyone feels safe and free to speak
Mm,
up, then I think they open up more, they show up even more their true character. And I really think it's something that can be taught in a certain way. But for me, I think the most essential issue is how you're approaching your employees and your colleagues, actually.
yeah. Patrick, I know you're doing your MBA, and you're doing a lot of studies right now around that, and also on leadership. So is that a topic that even comes up?
Tangentially, it is definitely not. And again, it's interesting, right? I would say to that, I'm not sure if teaching is the right phrase here. I think when you like a leader, we as humans try to mirror them. We try to do what they actually do. So I think the best thing as a leader you can do for your team is actually successfully show what empathy looks like, or any leadership quality, really. And if they like you and respect you as a leader, I think they will act more in that way as well.
Hmm.
Just because it's you, they like you, they respect
Right.
you, they kind of, I don't want to use imitate, that's why I'm saying mirror, they kind of
Yeah.
mirror what you do. So I'm not sure if it's really, I don't know if you can teach. It's such a good question. I'm not sure if you can teach empathy because it's such a human trait, but it's almost
Hmm.
like you live it, almost like as a
Hmm.
parent, right? You live it, your children will kind of learn from you,
You hope, yeah,
and that's how you
definitely.
pass it along. And I see
Yeah.
leadership and kind of investing in the next generation of leaders more like that, instead of,
Hmm.
okay, here's a slide, let's talk about leadership. And maybe that's
Right.
also why in an MBA program you don't learn about it, because it might just simply not be the right way to pass it on. But I'm not sure.
I agree. I agree with Patrick. Can empathy be taught? I think, well, I worked at a very large corporation, 80,000 employees. There were the massive training programs, massive leadership programs. Empathy was a key topic, but the way that they taught empathy was exactly what Patrick said, lead by example. So our
Hmm.
senior VPs would always come out on the screen. They would always share experiences. They would always showcase a little bit of vulnerability to
Mm.
to level set. Just because I have an SVP title doesn't mean that I sit way over here and the workflow is so far away from us. I think leading with empathy example, uh, spread throughout the organization, and others emulated that example. And to go to the MBA, can you learn that? I also did an MBA, and I was surprised during my MBA study how far away, or at least it was less quantitative for me. Sure, we had finance, sure, we had macroeconomics, but a large part of the MBA was about self reflection, self awareness, organizational structure and culture. And I think when you say, can you teach empathy? I think the right question is, can you instill a culture?
Mm. Yeah.
And um, and in the MBA, the one thing that I've taken away from that with me everywhere I go is culture eats strategy for breakfast. So
Yeah, so true. And you're right. Then it's doing it every day, isn't it? It's again, I think that that's the idea of what Patrick, I love that you really kind of like welcome and like the workbook, because that's how I also feel that this mirroring piece, but it's like doing things over and over again. Ben, picking up those cards and reading that like every day. And I believe that that's the consistency. And that was the idea too with the book, is that to give, okay, it's for women, but now I think we're starting to see that there are definitely some aspects that are for men, but it's that consistency and having this guide with you and going back to it and reading it again and hearing the stories. And eventually I would think, Patrick, to your point, that it has to stick. And maybe that's how we become more, but by reading, seeing, doing, practicing, and having that space to practice those skills and seeing someone else and seeing, each of you, when your employees see you, okay, I like that. I saw the reaction that got. That sticks with me. So how do I do that again? And it's encouraging that kind of behavior over and over again. Yeah. It's like practice. It's like when you learn to write your name, practice, 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 and eventually
Mm.
you get good at it. So maybe it's more practice than teaching it. Yeah. And vulnerability came up. And this is interesting for me because we talk a lot. Everyone, a lot of us have a connection also via the HBA. We talk a lot about vulnerability and how more women show a level of vulnerability. And it would really interest me, are you comfortable showing vulnerability? And maybe not you, because again, I know all of you, but do you see it also in your circle of individuals that you work with and leaders that you work with and employees? And if you have a new male employee as compared to a female employee, would you see it equal with showing and opening up and being vulnerable?
I would say there is a generational shift where
Mm-hmm.
men tend more to talk about vulnerability, showing fear, being more affected, vulnerable. I think over years this evolved.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is more openness to talk about vulnerability. Also in a male setting, this was also a
Mm-hmm.
topic in the book, how men behave in a men's setting room.
Yeah,
So you
I would
see
agree.
that.
I
Okay.
yeah, I think there's a big generational influence here as well.
Mm,
The difference I see right now is I think there's still a difference in terms of the setting in which that vulnerability is shown. Typically,
mm-hmm.
I think most men are sharing that vulnerability more on a one-to-one, one to sort of small, very, very small group basis where they feel it's a safer environment and perhaps, there's well-established relationships, well-established trust
Mm,
amongst that
okay.
group. Compared to, I think, the vulnerability that I see on a regular basis from, many of the female colleagues and leaders that I work with, which is much broader, much more open. Um, but I think many men are now looking at what they see their female counterparts and peers
Mm-hmm.
doing and showing in terms of their behaviors, and I think they're shifting and they're learning and showing
Mm,
the value, the trust, the authenticity that comes from showing that. And right now, it's really, really critical because the world in which we're all operating, regardless of your company, is
yeah,
so complex. It's so uncertain.
it is.
Pace of technology is changing that you can't be showing up with absolute confidence and knowing it all. That is just not appropriate for today's world. I think we all need to be showing up, on days, and I just don't know. I don't know the answer to that, and that's
Yeah.
absolutely fine. You know, I wouldn't have felt necessarily comfortable doing that 10 years ago. I feel very comfortable doing that now.
And what is the value add to showing your vulnerability?
I mean, I think for me, it comes down to trust. If
Mm.
and vulnerability is shown, I think it heightens trust. I think it accelerates the level of trust, and I think it maintains that trusting relationship.
I agree. I have the whole time Ben was talking, the word trust kept bouncing around in my mind. And can men be vulnerable? I think there are a lot of variables that go into that. You know, culture, being from different cultures, um, seniority in a company, how well you know the other person. But at the end of the day, it comes back to, can I trust the person to be able to open up to them? Will they
Right.
look at me as in the same way that I look at them? You know, I think trust is a major component. And um, yeah, in today's world, in this generation, you know, is it easier or harder to develop trust? Everything's kind of sort of boiled down to 10-second clips and, you know, the, the hot
Yeah.
topic of the moment.
Yeah.
How do you build trust when you're not at the office, when you're behind the computer all day? So I think vulnerability comes with trust, and uh, how easy or hard can you build that trust is a big factor.
If I may add, it's
Yeah.
also allowing a failure culture.
Yeah.
And it's also interconnected with leading by example, creating psychological safety among all colleagues, and allowing this failure culture. You promote basically in demonstrating and showing vulnerability, and that's good because
Yeah.
people feel safe. They try new ways, new things. They
Yeah.
start to experiment, and I think this is the starting point of innovation.
Yeah.
And for me, absolutely critical. Psychological safety and allowing a certain failure culture. And also promote that from the top, showing, giving examples. I think this is a valuable lessons which I learned and experienced in the past. Yeah.
I think it's also really about authenticity. I think we want to be led by people who are human. We don't want to be led by robots. And I think in the age of
Yeah.
AI, we're even more worried about being led by robots than ever before.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to mention that vulnerability, and I did a little bit of research into vulnerability a couple of years ago, is also a form of capital, almost like social capital. You trade it in for something else. And I think that's when it leads to what Damiano just said. If you show vulnerability, you can trade it in for deservingness. So you deserve to make mistakes. You deserve to show yourself as not the strong leader who knows everything. So it's almost like a chip that you can play when you think about it strategically. So I think it's actually a really critical part of being an authentic leader is to show
Right.
some kind of vulnerability. The funny thing is, and I think we already discussed this too, when I talk to leaders about vulnerability, is it's always something they show down. So everything like a CEO shows it to everyone in the organization, but not to the board. And because the board
Yeah.
does not, it's not a form of capital necessarily for them, but
Yeah.
it is for everyone else in the organization. So I think how to use that, you still have to be very strategic. Unfortunately, I wish it would go in all directions, but I'm
Right.
not sure if we're there yet.
Yeah, you're right. And how valuable would it be if the CEO could go to the board and show that and say, I don't have this, and that's why I need your help? Because what often happens is you hear, I got it, everything's fine, and it's definitely not fine. And then that's where, and were the culture different, how many problems could be resolved much sooner by showing that vulnerability. And I think that that's just such a true thing. And Damiano, your point to the failure, because I actually have a failure log in the book that you actually document those and talk about that and bring it in and have those discussions, because if you just push them away, you don't have these lessons learned and how can I do things better. And I really love that idea that we talk about failure as it's normal. We're human beings, and I have little failures every day. And if I don't talk about them and reflect on them and ponder on them openly, then how am I going to improve? And I just think that is just that for me, that's also something really to bring into leadership and to welcome that. And that goes back to the trust. It's funny because trust has been like the overarching word of the day. I think it came up really early in the conversation, and everything kind of leads to that we do as leaders. So maybe it's not so much as gender. And if we go back to that, I would be really curious to hear, after having looked at the book and looked at some of the exercises and the stories, does it resonate for men, or are there areas where you think, okay, this doesn't and this does, or this would need potentially to have a different approach or a different angle in order to resonate and have more impact for men?
You mean the book, the way the
Or
book is?
chapters, areas, maybe even not necessarily just as an entirety, but are there certain chapters where you go, I read that and was like, does not resonate at all, or the words that I used, or the way that I approached some of these topics, was there anything where you're like, nah?
Well, for me, when I received the book, when I looked through the table of contents, I zoomed right into chapters 10 and chapters 11, because to me, those were the areas that focus primarily on women. So I wanted to learn
Mm,
about the women's perspective. What barriers do they face? What about women's health is important? So
mm.
I was like, those are the first two chapters that I read. And then
Wow, that's
after
interesting.
after that, I moved to chapter 7, because it has a direct impact on what I do. I'm a professional networker. I'd like to think I'm a professional networker. So learning a woman's perspective about networking and creating what a guide for networking was of interest to me, and a lot of things resonated there. Um, I don't have anything that I thought, wow, this could take a different angle, because a lot of things did resonate. But the one thing that I was surprised about was your last chapter, or maybe it was chapter 13, the legacy building.
Legacy,
Like
yeah.
I've went through my whole career. I feel like I'm like trying to build a career, focused on trying to build a career, have a life outside of work. I never thought about the legacy. And having that chapter in the book was like, hey, wait, why am I doing this? What can I leave behind for others? That kind of opened my eyes a bit.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and no, I would agree with Cyrus. There wasn't anything that I looked at that really jarred, or I felt, okay, that's not relevant for a male reader. In fact, quite the contrary, actually. I was just using the other day in fact, it's bookmarked with a yellow sticky, the networking chapter, because that just
Mm,
describes beautifully how you should be approaching networking, regardless of your gender, to be honest.
mm.
So I don't think you would change anything there at all.
Okay, nice.
It showed me how bad I am at networking, I have to say. I'm just terrible at it. And I know it full well, and I have not invested really into it. But what I really liked, and I think that men, from my experience, have a little bit more of an issue with, is also this idea of mentoring and having a
Mm,
mentor. And
right.
we try to fight it on our own. And then when we
Mm-hmm.
do, it's like a badge of honor. I did it on my own. But when I read through all of this, I think we don't have to. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with asking for help, asking for a mentor, actually mentoring others, whether that's men or women.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't really matter at the end of the day. So I agree with everything that's been said before. I don't think there was anything really in the book that I thought didn't apply to really everyone. And that's kind of also
Okay.
one of the key takeaways I had from the
Yeah.
book, because at the end of the day, we're all still the same,
Yeah.
right? At heart, like, yeah,
Yeah.
the society and organizations are structured differently, and for some it's easier, for others it's harder. It helps me kind of understand others better having read the book, but I wouldn't say there was anything in there that I couldn't learn anything from at all.
Okay. Interesting. And Damiano, what about from your perspective?
So it's completely transferable, and this was also a question which I posed to myself when I received the book, if the concepts also apply to men. Completely, absolutely. Was what I was asking myself was about the topic of visibility,
Yes.
how men and
Mm-hmm.
women are pushing towards visibility, if they really have different approaches, so that maybe women are more reserved and men more assertive in getting through. There I reflected a lot, also thinking about the past and my experience, and uh, difficult to find a general conclusion about visibility
Yeah,
and how also to push women's
right.
careers.
Yeah. That's an interesting point because that comes up a lot. If we have done some mentoring programs and this advocacy piece and the visibility, because that's one of the chapters is how do I do that? And and I've just tried to come up with ways and I now listening to this entire conversation, I think we can all do it. It's like how do you bring storytelling into your visibility? How do you stand up for what you want? How do you prepare for meetings and going into it? Do you Sometimes I think are men better prepared or there's this bias because we hear that a lot. Women say this a lot that men are much better at negotiating anything for themselves. They're much better at promoting themselves visibly within the organization. I don't know if it's they feel more comfortable with it than some women do, but I think that's a good point, Damiano. That's probably one of the areas that I hear and see from my interactions that could be a bit of a taking a different approach potentially, or a comfortableness even from men and women.
Yeah, especially about self-advocacy. I experienced also female
Mhm.
leaders being very good in promoting themselves and showing up and building the narrative around her
Mhm.
person. And I could learn a lot about that. And there I was not sure if it also really applies as described.
Ben, would you have any kind of correlation with that, but with how men and women present themselves or advocate for themselves?
Uh, I mean, I think it's well, it's well documented. We've talked a lot about it during the HBA conversations and the summits that I've been to. That you know, if you look at when we're recruiting, and you look at the caliber of applicants, vast majority of women that apply for roles, I think will be meeting the key criteria that you want. Despite that, many of them may have been hesitant to apply. Typically, is what we've heard, or they may be unsure. When you look at some, not all men, but some men, it will be pretty light in terms of their ability to meet the criteria that you're
Mhm.
looking for, but their confidence basically tells them that actually this is a great opportunity. I'm going to put myself out there. I may not get it, but I'm going to have a go, and you just never know. So, I've definitely seen that theme over the years. I think the other theme that I've seen it again is this belief from many males that uh, confidence is demonstrated through dominance, whether that be airtime, time in meetings, speaking time, etc., presence,
Yeah.
visibility. That's just not the case. I think it's much more subtle than that. It's rooted in ultimately your conviction in your purpose, your beliefs, your values. That's what confidence
Right.
means to me, and particularly when people aren't watching. And I think many female leaders just have a better handle on that than male leaders.
Interesting. Nice. Well, 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 gentlemen, you've really also given me something to ponder. Like, do I need to change the title of the book somehow to now just a career guide to leave the woman piece out? Because it sounds like a lot really resonated. Just one final thing. I'm just curious because some of the writing, obviously, it's me. It's very female. Is it? Did that the style? Was that also something that you could like really dive into? Was it?
It was easy to read.
Yeah.
I like the use of uh, stories. So you tell the story of a number of different women throughout the book. In each chapter, there's a story about a real life case. And while I was reading it, I was like, gosh, Sabine must have interviewed hundreds of women, like hundreds of hours of interviews to glean these insights. But it was easy to read. The stories were compelling. I read it in a matter of days. It was well done.
I'm just curious about that, to see the style of writing, if there's any kind of difference there that somebody, yeah, it's like, no, didn't try us talk a lot about art and masterpiece. So I use like also analogies that are potentially not relevant or interesting, but sounds like that is not the case.
No,
Okay.
it was very authentic to you. As I would read it through, I immediately, if I didn't know it was written by you, but you could quickly get that sense. It was great, and
Nice.
I loved the fact that as I was reading through and I saw the examples. Okay, yeah, I recognize that. I know that lady. I know that leader.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You picked some
Yeah.
great female leaders there as examples.
Yeah, I wanted to pick women that are relatable, because we often hear stories in books about people that are so far away, um, and I wanted it to be your friend, your mom. So, what do you think, or what ripple do you hope that this conversation um, starts?
I mean, for me, I think we talked about trust and authenticity.
Mm,
I hope that anyone listening to this, and particularly a younger generation, feels free to really spend the time to get to know themselves, the values, their purpose, and then to live a life and to show up at work uh, every day in line with that, and not trying to mimic or be anyone else other than themselves. That
who
I
they
think
are.
is the future of leadership.
Right.
Well said. My thoughts were along those lines. Be proactive about self-reflection. I mean, when after reading the book, it kind of inspired me to be more proactive about self-reflection, career
Mm,
development. Foster diverse spectrum of perceptions to shape my own career, which I think in a lot of ways could be more richer and rewarding.
thanks, Cyrus. Patrick, how about you?
Yeah, to me, I would say just be firm and demand what you deserve. And then once you have it, be empathetic and fair in whatever you do. So I think there's a time when you can be a little firm and be a little more, I don't know the right words, just really demand what you think you deserve. And then
Yeah.
once you have it, be part of a team and be kind. I think kindness is a word that came up in this conversation as well.
Yeah,
And I think that's
definitely.
really important.
It is very important. Damiano, the last word to you.
That's very appreciated. So thanks a lot. Despite the language barrier that I bring with. So as I talked about failure culture, I think it's
Mhm.
also all about the courage to let errors and failure happen, to learn
Mhm.
from it, to adapt and to
Yeah.
grow. I think it's the only way to really grow, to let failure happen, to embrace change and grow.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Very inspiring words, gentlemen. Thank you so much. It has been such a treat. Thanks for taking the time to read the book. I'm glad that it's resonated, and I hope to see you all soon.
Thanks, Sabine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.